Good evening. I'm Bobby Jager, and on behalf of Cascade Policy Institute, I'll be the moderator this evening of this panel discussion about how school choice changes lives. As a mother of 13, I have a unique perspective on school choice. My children have attended Department of Defense, public, charter, and online schools. In addition, most of my children have been homeschooled through their elementary years and some of their middle school years. I can testify that school choice changes lives. And my selection as Oregon's Mother of the Year of 2012 gave me a special platform to share and promote school choice. Tonight will be an evening of asking questions, getting answers, and sharing thoughts and ideas with others about school choice. As I look out over the audience, I know that I'm among people who understand there's no do-overs. Education shouldn't be based on our zip codes, and we only get one chance. I don't believe that there is anything more important than talking about education and the future of our nation. But before we start, I'd like to thank some people for helping this evening. Cascade Policy Institute. We'd like to thank Steve Buckstein for his vision, for the years and the time that he put into tonight. KXL, Burnett Media Group. Greg has been amazing to pull this all together, and we're excited to be here. Also, will you help me welcome Senator Dennis Linthicum and his sweet wife, Diane. We're so happy to have you here this evening. They are our warriors in the building, and I love them. And remember, those of you who are watching or listening, you can also send in questions, and we'll get to those as many as we can. So let's get started, and let me introduce my guest to you tonight. Tim Keller leads the Educational Choice Team at the Institute of Justice, a nonprofit national law firm for liberty, where he designs and defends educational choice programs in courtrooms nationwide. He served as IJ's lead counsel in Arizona Christian school tuition, organizing versus win, a U.S. Supreme Court, Victory, Arizona's pioneering tax credit funded private school scholarship program. Wow. Tim lives in Arizona with his wife and 4 children. Our second guest is Matt Ladner. He is a senior research fellow at the Charles Koch Institute with several published studies on school choice, charter schools, and special education reform. He helped to create Arizona's Empowerment Scholarship Account program and has been invited to provide testimony to Congress, state legislatures, and the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Matt lives in Arizona also with his wife and 3 children. Help me welcome Matt. Our third guest is Katherine Hickok. She is Executive Vice President and Director of Cascade Scholarship Program for low-income children, the Children's Scholarship Program Fund for Oregon. Katherine manages Cascade's print and online material and oversees development operations, donor relations, and events. She also writes and speaks on school choice and religious freedom issues. Katherine lives in Portland, Oregon. Help me welcome Katherine. We are so excited tonight. Our speakers tonight have been the main proponents of this program for several years, and they truly stand out in this field. They have a great understanding of the program and a great appreciation for what it takes to truly make school choice continue on a path of progress, and a remarkable vision of the future that choice changes lives. Let's get started. All right. Here we go. First question. This is to each one of you. So we'll start, I guess, with Matt and go down. I pick on him a lot. We've spent more time together. Matt, what caused you or made you get involved in school choice?
People who get involved in the school choice movement tend to develop a real passion for the idea that, one size does not fit all in education, and that every family should have the opportunity to find a school that is a good fit for their child. We tend to make the mistake of talking about good schools and bad schools. We need to leave that paradigm behind. There are people that I know that I went to college with who, went to one of the worst public schools in Texas, but graduated with a master's degree from MIT. Right? There are also kids attending really highly regarded schools, but they're just not a good fit for them, and they might be better off somewhere else. So what we need is for families to have the opportunity to find that good fit that will serve their needs, interests, and aspirations in life. And once you start getting involved in this movement, it tends to get under your skin.
It does. All right. Tim?
So the Institute for Justice got involved in this movement in 1991. When Democratic Representative Polly Williams teamed up with Wisconsin Governor Tommy Thompson to create the first modern school choice program. And when that program passed, IJ's co-founder realized that a lawsuit was on its way. And so he got on a plane and flew to Wisconsin and met with Polly and Governor Thompson and said, "Are you ready for the suit?" And they, of course, said, What suit? But we had the foresight to realize that these programs would be challenged in court when you gave parents an opportunity to exercise a genuine choice as to where they send their children. And so what IJ does is we represent parents and children in the litigation. Most lawsuits are filed by an outside organization like the teachers' unions or a group like the ACLU or Americans United for Separation of Church and State against the governing body that passed the legislation. And there's a missing voice in that, and that's the voice of parents and students. And so we have the opportunity to give that voice in court to the true beneficiaries of the program. And so that's how IJ got involved. And then my involvement began just a few years later. In 1997, Arizona passed a tax credit funded scholarship program for students who wanted to attend private schools. And that program was challenged, and IJ came to the rescue of that program. I was at the time working as a policy analyst at the Goldwater Institute. I was on a path to get a PhD in economics. I thought I was going to write policy papers for the rest of my life. But when I saw what IJ did, the voice that they were able to give the voiceless, I changed directions and I went to law school with a single sole focused goal of one day being an IJ lawyer. And that dream came true just shortly after I graduated from law school. Since I've been at IJ, there hasn't been a single day that I haven't been in court somewhere in this country defending a school choice program from legal attack. So that's my story.
Well, we're glad you made that change. We're excited. Katherine.
Well, educational choice for all Oregon families has been a signature issue for Cascade Policy Institute since even before our founding by Steve Buckstein more than 26 years ago. This is something that Cascade has worked tirelessly on because we all believe that every child should have the chance to succeed. And we all know that most of kids' waking hours are spent on education in some form or other, and the environment that every child has during that time has such a great impact on who that child grows up to be, how they can develop their talents, how their needs are met, how they can flower as human beings. And one aspect of our work at Cascade is to provide a scholarship program for low-income kids here in Oregon. And I have seen over the last many number of years I've been working with the Children's Scholarship Fund Oregon, how low-income parents sacrifice to pay their portion of their children's tuition because they're paying at least half of it themselves. We provide a modest tuition scholarship that really makes the difference for them between being able to afford the education of their choice and not. And it's just been beautiful over the years, the way I've seen these kids grow up, the letters they write, talking about how much their schools mean to them, how much their education means to them, what they love learning. And it's just watching them flower as people as they get older that has been so rewarding, and all of us at Cascade appreciate that. So we would like to see more Oregon kids have those choices, and that's why we will always work for educational choice for all Oregon families.
Thanks. So our next question is kind of fun. Some of you will be able to relate to it, and some of you will be like, well, I don't know. The question is, what does education look like today compared to 60 years ago? So some of us are thinking, no metal shop, no mechanics. You want to try, Tim?
Sure. There was a gentleman who was a real giant in the school choice movement for a number of years who lived right here in Oregon. We lost him several years ago. His name was Andrew Coulson, and he was a scholar with the Cato Institute. And before Andrew passed away, he produced a documentary series that actually aired on PBS about school choice. And that series began with Andrew pulling up in front of the proverbial one-room schoolhouse and walking through it and talking about education, and then morphing into the modern school choice, the modern classroom. And the remarkable thing was there wasn't a lot that was different about it. There was still a chalkboard with the piece of chalk and the eraser and the desks lined up in the same rows, and there was very little innovation that had occurred since the one-room schoolhouse to most school environments today. And so I think that's what is remarkable about looking 60 years ago and today, is that really there hasn't been a lot of innovation, a lot of change in the way that education occurs. And as an interesting thought experiment, I suspect that if we could all purge from our minds what education looks like today, and sat down with the assignment of crafting or creating a publicly funded education system, the system that we came up with today would look radically different than what we currently have.
I agree. I mean, look, there's reasons why the public school system exists the way it does. It was created in a bygone era, and it was responding to the needs and perceived needs and desires of that age. It hasn't changed a lot. In fact, Andrew Coulson once said that the last major innovation introduced into American classroom really was a chalkboard, literally. Like, that was it, unless you want to count a whiteboard. I don't know, right? And I think that the one thing we should note, however, is that all state constitutions guarantee public funding for K-12 education in one fashion or another. Here, I understand there is a guarantee of a system of common schools. Some state constitutions guarantee public funding, right? And so providing options above and beyond that system is actually not a threat to that, right? That a system of common schools guaranteed in your state constitution is approximately as close to a permanent institution as you have in American life. If we polled it, it would be 90-something% in favor and some tiny percent against. And of course, the process of amending the state constitution is unbelievably difficult. It's just not something to worry about. It's a phantom fear that somehow providing options is going to destroy that. And in fact, all the evidence is it would make it better. And in fact, the best district systems we see now are actually adapting themselves to a choice environment, creating more magnet schools, erasing attendance boundaries, providing more choice within the district context itself. And that's modernizing public education for the 21st century.
Yeah. Do you have any comments?
Well, we really know more at this point in history than perhaps ever before about the differences in the ways people learn. And this is really a time in history where we have more options than ever before and more opportunities than ever before. And we need to get our education providing caught up with the options that are there for families. And families' lives are very complicated, and children's needs can be very complex. And bringing the two together, the education providers with the families, is really what educational choice is all about.
That's right. We're so grateful for choice. We just want more. Next question. Tim, I'll start with you. Why do you believe parents should have the right to choose their children's form of education? Is that loaded?
No. So, believe it or not, there was one state in the Union that tried to outlaw all forms of private and home education and require that every student attend a public school.
Which state was that, Tim?
Why, it happens to be Oregon. And as a result, there was a landmark United States Supreme Court decision striking down that law and saying that parents have a fundamental constitutionally protected right to direct the education and upbringing of their children, which included the right to opt out of the public system and to educate their children in alternative environments. And so we know that parents have that right. And yet, many parents simply don't have the means to exercise that right. And so school choice programs empower parents to exercise their fundamental constitutional right to direct the education and upbringing of their own children.
Gee, I love that. I like that idea. Matt, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and read about the history of the period you're talking about, this happened in the 1920s, right? So the late 1800s into the early 20th century was a period of sort of nativism in the United States. And it was there was a great backlash against Catholicism, right? And what was going, from my reading of history, what's going on is that there were nativist groups like the Know Nothings and the Ku Klux Klan. And by the way, this was not limited to Oregon. So just like, let's put that on the table. This was all over the place. Most state constitutions got amended during this period. We'll talk about that later. But basically what was happening is that these groups wanted to force you to send your child to a public school because they had curriculum that they approved of and were going to turn these people into real Americans. Okay? Now, if that thought doesn't frighten you, I don't know what will, right? And literally, I mean, the United States Supreme Court made a profoundly wise decision in striking that law down.
Okay. Okay, we said all we're going to say. I know. Parents, I just love the idea parents get the choice. It's a right. We're the parents. It's important. All right, Matt, this one's yours. What do you think is bothering public school parents these days?
A lot of things, but, you know, I actually had the opportunity to sit in a number of focus groups in 4 different cities and all kinds of different parents and opinion leaders and whatnot. And one of the things I would say more than anything else, the message that we got back from watching these groups is that parents are deeply dissatisfied with the conduct of standardized testing as it is currently practiced. And over and over and over again, what we'd hear these parents say is that we feel like schooling has turned into nonstop test prep, and we don't like it, and we want it to stop, right? And it's interesting because if you think, and you know, that's not to say there should not be any kind of academic transparency in schooling, right? Although from the focus groups we saw, that's kind of where a lot of the public apparently is. It's basically that there's been a movement to standardize education, right, in the public system. And part of what we're seeing today is a countervailing pressure in the opposite direction to customize education, right? And we're seeing this in a lot of different ways through the rapid growth of homeschooling. There's a new, what I would describe as sort of a micro-schooling movement out there, with people forming very small private schools. There's, you know, to a very large extent, there are people that are engaging in sort of a multi-vendor, multi-teacher, multi-source education and it's so common and normal that they don't even realize it's happening, right? So some research came out recently, Bobby, that said that in the early 1970s, when I would have been in elementary school, wealthy people spent 3 times as much as the poorest people on what they called enrichment activities, right? This could be private tutoring or club sports, or now today, mathnasium or Kumon, right? 3 times as much. And today that figure is 6 times as much, okay? So there are a lot of people that are sending their kids to district schools, but also engaging in this wider universe of options and whatnot. And I think that's also very indicative of this desire to sort of build a customized education. And the question is how can we provide opportunities for less advantaged families to do the same for their kids?
Yeah, I think sometimes parents don't even realize that they're doing these things. They're doing music lessons and they're doing karate and all these things, and they don't think it's in the education field. They just think it's making their child more rounded or a better child, and it's totally helping their child in all kinds of ways. Okay, Matt, you're back on the chart. You must have pulled the lucky cord. What is the best form of education?
I don't think there is a best form of education, right? There's no one true way that works for everyone, right? The magic of the choice system is finding those good fits, and it is a completely bottom up, decentralized source of not only improving outcomes but also greatly improving parental satisfaction, right? And it's a source of improvement that simply cannot be produced from the top down. There may or may not be things we can do from the top down to improve outcomes. We've been trying for a long time and to limited effect. But that bottom-up process of where I match my child with the school's particular strengths and their particular interests and aspirations, and that simply cannot be emulated from the top down. It has to be a decentralized process.
I agree. Tim?
Yeah, so my communications director always tells me to go for my PhD when I'm in an environment like this. And what he means by that is personalize, humanize, and dramatize. So I'm going to give you a story about one of the clients I represented out in Arizona. And I think this goes to both the prior question you asked, Matt, and also this question about what is the best form of education. So Austin Fox, when I met him, he was a sophomore at a public high school. And if you just by all outward appearances, he was a pretty normal teenager. But in fact, he had Asperger's syndrome, which is he's high functioning autism. And so as a result, he had what's called an individualized education program from the public school system, which is supposed to create opportunities to really personalize his education in a way that perhaps other students don't have. And yet, the reality was he was stuck with a one-size-fits-all approach to education. Right. And that was the frustration that his mom had, that even with the IEP, it was still a one-size-fits-all approach to education. And at the time, he had a 2.0 GPA, and he was about to just drop out, maybe get his GED, and see where life would take him. That was where he was. And Arizona passed a program that gave students with disabilities an opportunity to get a scholarship and to attend a private school. And his mom convinced him to go down that path. And I was there while he was trying to find that school. And one of the things that his mom said was different for him was that when he would sit in a public school classroom, there would be all sorts of ambient noise around him, which there's a lot of ambient noise in this room, people shuffling seats, and most of our brains tune that out. But his sensory processing system doesn't. And so he says for him, even in a quiet environment like this, it was like being in a Vegas casino. And so that's why he was struggling. And so what he did was went out and found a school that operated in a sort of a private school type or a homeschool type environment where the students worked at their own pace and they had master teachers that they had access to go and ask questions about, and all the students moved along at their own pace. And the result was that after 2 years there, he moved from a 2.0 GPA to a 4.0 GPA and was actually able to save money from this particular school choice program in Arizona for future college expenses. I mean, I really can't think of another education reform measure that can do that for an individual student. So it's a really remarkable story.
Well, I think even as moms, we know that every child learns differently. You can have them all in the same house, and we did, but every child needed a different fit, and we had to make that happen. I think we have a question. Disability, do you have it, Miranda?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you mostly answered my question with the Austin Fox story. I have a disabled child. I went to Arizona this summer and saw that they have over 30 schools where they teach autism, STEM, various things. Here in Oregon, this daughter just started kindergarten, was given an IEP, and was told she would go to a specific school, and I was given absolutely no choice in what she's learning right now. And so my question was, are there any charters or anything like this that we have in Oregon for choice for our disabled students?
We can talk about that after, if that's okay, because I'm not sure exactly what schools do what intake on the students. I know that that's been a big concern. We've had parents call me and say it feels like kids that have these disabilities aren't accepted or not wanted in these schools. So I hear what you're saying, and we've had a lot of that. We talked about something we're going to talk about a little bit later, but with some funding and stuff, starting an actual school, that these kids could get the care that they need, because it seems like IEPs, which I've had a son on an IEP, they just fall through the cracks, you know. And I'm not saying they all do. I'm not, you know, talking bad. I just think that their needs have to be met, and mom knows how those needs are met. And when it just goes on through, the frustration rises and the child doesn't succeed.
One of the things that we're talking about with educational choice is putting the power in the hands of parents to an extent that they do not currently have right now, and we've seen that in other states. I'm sure you could go into more detail about that, but in states where they do have educational choice laws for parents, it empowers parents to leave a situation where, even with the assistance that they are given in their current school, if they feel that that is still not enough, their needs are still not being met, this is still not a good fit for their child, they're able to walk out the door and find another fit, even if it is a private solution or private tutoring or a combination of things, because it may not necessarily be from one brick building to another brick building that specializes in this. It could be a whole bunch of things. It could be maybe a day school with supplemental tutoring, or homeschooling with outside classes. The parent knows the child, and in a lot of cases, you can have parents and doctors and therapists and educators all working together to meet the unique needs of a specific situation, and that's really what parental choice does, that is different from just an IEP in the typical public school system.
Correct. I love it.
I agree with what was said earlier. I mean, look, there's very well-meaning people in the public schools that are working with special needs children. My mother was a special needs teacher, but having said that, it tends to be the case that the most frustrated parents in the entire public school system are the parents of special needs children. And the federal system has a lot of things that we can be proud of. It's landmark civil rights legislation. There were like 1 million kids denied access to public schools before what became IDEA passed. But having said that, it leaves a lot to be desired, and probably the student population that has the most to gain from a broader universe of options are children with disabilities. And I can tell you a story about one of our first ESA parents told me her story, and she was on the verge of filing a lawsuit against her school district. Right, her son had just a terrible time with bullying and just a lot of the problems that you hear about. And so she had contacted an attorney that specializes in disability law, which are few and far between in most places, and they're certainly few and far between in Arizona. And what this attorney told her is like, well, I'll need a $15,000 retainer to start. It's going to last X number of months, and you might lose. And this mom said, well, that's really not going to work for my family's budget. And this attorney, I mean, bless his heart, because this is probably not in his own personal financial interest, told her, well, they just passed this program called the Empowerment Scholarship Accounts Program, and I think your son would be eligible for it. So you might want to check that out. Okay. So she got, she signed her son Jordan up for this program. He got into the program. She said, I moved him to a private school. Okay. And she said, the private school was better. It was good. I have no complaints. It was profoundly different experience than the public schools. But in the second year, I just decided, you know what? I think I could do better. Okay. So in the second year, Jordan did not go to that private school. She hired a tutor who had specialized training in teaching reading to the blind. Okay. She was able to double the amount of physical therapy her son was getting. Okay. And he had a truly sort of a la carte experience with multiple people helping him with specific problems. Later, like about 2 years after I spoke to this lady, I saw her again at the Arizona legislature, and there was a debate going on about this very program. And she just, was always there to testify on this program. And the debate on this committee in the Arizona House of Representatives was about some of the critics of the program were saying, there's no accountability. This program has no accountability. Okay. And this mom got up to that committee and said, you gentlemen keep talking about this word accountability, and I don't understand what you're talking about. And let me tell you something, that every single person that has anything to do with the education of my son Jordan is directly accountable to me. I hired them, and if they don't do a good job, I will let them go. And to me, that is accountability. And there was like a tear of joy streaking down my cheek. It was so like our K-12 conversation has gotten so confused about this word accountability. Accountability is not bureaucratic compliance, right? Accountability is actually being held responsible for your results, right? And this is the kind of power that the ability to choose provides families. When you provide families the opportunity to pick the right situation for their own child, that's real accountability, not sort of like, to use a phrase from a movie I believe was filmed here in Oregon, like sort of double secret probation accountability, which is a lot of what we get these days.
Well, and to bring that story more current, I was actually in that home. I got to see Jordan 4 or 5 years ago at a conference, and he had just started your special needs ESA, and he was riding a horse, and something to do with riding a horse and balance and stuff. And this mom was on stage and just said, this is a blessing. This helps Jordan so much. And he was like 6 or 8. So when I went down to Arizona this last year, I actually got to go in their home. This child now is like 6'3". He's huge, but he's wonderful. And I watched teachers come in that she had hired, and they spent time with Jordan and his sister, who has some struggles of her own. And it was remarkable to see someone work with someone in the right fit, right? That's what we're looking for, is that right fit to make the child feel success and the mom feel like things are moving forward. So it was a great opportunity. So one of our other questions, we might as well just jump into it, is we believe all students need and deserve an education that fits their needs. And I think we all agree on that. Tim, can you tell us your thoughts and exposure to special needs students and how they fit in, and talk about IDEA?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, earlier the question was asked what sort of options exist here in Oregon for students with special needs, and I don't know the answer to that. But what I can tell you, based on the experience I have in Arizona, where we have programs for students with special needs, in Florida, where I'm defending a program for special needs students right now in front of the Florida Supreme Court, in states like Mississippi, Tennessee, Utah, where we have these programs, what I've seen is additional options being created for families.
Right.
And so a lot of times we hear that when a student decides to leave the public school system and participate in a private school choice program, they are losing their rights under the federal IDEA, because when they do that, they do leave the public system. And so they don't have the due process rights that they had in the public school system, but they have something even better than that. They've got direct accountability to the school where they have now placed their child. And if things aren't working, they can remove their student and find something else. And of course, they can always go back to the public school system and obtain a new IEP and go back to that system. So they never lose the ability to return to that accountability system in the public schools. But we've just seen such creative models come online for these students. In Arizona, one of my favorite, I'm going to tell you two quick stories about two different schools. One was not originally a school. It was a therapy center where students would come after school for occupational therapy, speech therapy, etc. And those therapists were trying to communicate to the teachers at the schools what those students really needed, what the IEP really needed to reflect, how their education should be changed to help these students move along. And there was just this complete disconnect between what the therapists were seeing and working on and what was occurring in the school. But when we passed the ESA program, this therapy center opened up a school and hired teachers. And some of the therapists actually moved over. And the bottom line is that now the therapists who are working with the students after school and the teachers during the school day are on the same page, and they're coordinating and they're working on things. We're just seeing such tremendous growth in those students as a result of that new school being added to that therapy center. And then there was another group of parents whose students are has severe autism, and they were in schools that were trying to teach them academics when the reality was they were probably not going to go to college. They were probably not going to have what we might consider a traditional path in life. And what these parents realized is that in addition to academics, they needed life skills. And so they opened up a school that has washing machines and the students bring their laundry and do laundry at school. They have field trips to the grocery store where they do grocery shopping, and the students interact with the cashier and learn how to pay for items, make change, make eye contact. And they haven't lost sight of the academic component, but they've added the life skills component. So the students will come in and there's a kitchen on campus and they make breakfasts and they make their lunch and they make dinners. And it's a whole child approach to education. And those schools would never have come online absent the ability of parents to make an independent selection of where they want their child to go to school.
I love it. You know, we want options. We want different choices. We have schools out there that are doing so many great things, but they're thinking out of the box. They're not thinking in the box. And we had an event where we had a man come out and talk to us about starting a school, and it was a school the children didn't have, they were just in a bad area, and it was kind of gang related, and he went to these kids and said, let's start we're in a food like desert, and they said, let's start a co-op, and the kids said, why should we start a co-op? Let's start a grocery store. And so they did, and these kids are just like blooming, and they're buying and firing and doing ads and, you know, selling. And they're making, one kid said, I make more money than my brother selling drugs. So, you know, but it's out of the box. And that's what we're looking for. Fit the child to the need and their success. Okay.
A couple more things on the disability situation. Nationwide, 2% of children with disabilities attend private school at district expense. Okay. And that is usually after either a successful lawsuit under IDEA or a threat of a lawsuit under IDEA, and sometimes it's a result of a mutual agreement between the parents and the school district. Okay, that system, while theoretically available to everyone, is actually way more accessible to people with a lot of zeros in their bank account. Okay, so the first choice program for children with disabilities started in Florida in 1999 and is done by a senator named John McKay. He was the Senate president of Florida at that time, and he was a special needs dad. Okay, and the thing is that, you know, he's like, we're not going to do this for the few. We're going to do this for everyone. Okay, we're going to give everyone, every student with an IEP, the opportunity to attend another public or private school of their choice, and we're going to let the funding follow them. Okay, the second point on the funding, though. Okay, since IDE passed in the mid-1970s, the consistent point made by districts and their central claim about special education has always been the federal government and state government don't give enough money for special education. You guys don't send enough money to the districts for special education, so we have to transfer funding out of general education into special education. It's not fair. Give us more money. John McKay says, okay, what if we create a scholarship program to only allow children to leave with just their state funding? What did the opponent say? You can't do that. It's going to drain money. No, wait a minute. You can't have it both ways, right? And what it boils down to the question of is special education overfunded or underfunded? Which one of those two things is the case, right? Because it can't be both. Right? If the special education funding works the way that public school advocates have said for the last 40 years, then they have no cause for complaint by allowing people to leave with just their state funding, right? And the bottom line is that Arizona has had we've had different choice programs for children with disabilities in place, going back to the middle of last decade, and we've seen some of the largest academic gains for children with disabilities in the public schools in the entire country. Okay, so this is not an either or. It's not a win-lose. This is a way for everyone to do better and enjoy better outcomes.
I love it. We have a question in the audience. Mark Thielman.
Question from Mr. Mark Thielman.
Okay, you've partially answered this, but we'll put you on the hot spot. As a school superintendent of an innovative charter school, and having driven in Portland on my way here, you can't go too far in Portland without hearing social justice and the concept of making sure that the little guy gets access, so on and so forth. So that's the context to this question. But can you guys talk a little bit about the role that school choice could play, that it's still limited in Oregon, in regard to creating equal opportunities and access for low socioeconomic, disadvantaged, and underserved populations? Because right now, as it is, and I see this in the work that I do, because a lot of times I see families drive 50 miles to meet a bus, because and then they're on the bus for an hour to come to my school, and that's an amazing sacrifice that a lot of parents make in order for us to serve them. But right now, a lot of kids are being told, again, for parents that either don't have the means or aren't as motivated, you have to stay and fail. So can you talk about how important this would be?
Yeah, I mean, look, earlier I told you that public education is as close to a permanent institution as we possibly have in our society. But I'll say this right now. Zip code assignment needs to go. Okay? Yay. Zip code assignment to schools is a source of profound racial and economic segregation. Okay. And again, it's so common and it's so normal that people just kind of take it for granted, or, well, I guess that's just kind of the way it works, right? It's an incredibly stratifying practice, right? And if you believe in social justice, then you ought to be against zip code assignment, right? In addition to that, right, we mentioned the enrichment spending and how wealthier people do more of it and poor people don't do nearly as much, okay? The same is true in school funding, right? In most places, right, is it the leafy suburbs that gets less money and the inner city that gets more money, or is it the other way around? Okay, like, again, like what Tim said, if we were to start a schooling system from scratch, right, and we can do better than this, right? But right now, what we have in most places in this country is a system that gives the most to the kids who start with the most, right? It's possible for us to expand freedom and opportunity for families and to do the exact opposite, right? We could have a weighted system that gives more money to lower income students to try to make up for some of these deficits, right? And we do that, we claim we do this in the public school system, but in reality, we do very little of it.
Okay. You want to say anything?
Well, I'm going to tell another story.
We like stories.
I do. I love stories. So one of the families I represented in defense of Arizona's individual tax credit scholarship program was Glenn and Rhonda Denard. Both Glenn and Rhonda grew up in inner city Phoenix, really low income, atrocious schools at the time. They both managed to escape, got college educations, and decided to return to their community, to return back to South Phoenix and to plant a church there and do everything they could to just give back. But there was one problem. The congregation was small, the income was low, and when they started having children, they had to make a real decision, because the schools there were still underperforming. They were atrocious, just as like they were when Glenn and Rhonda were growing up. And so they both had degrees. They could have left the church. They could have gotten great paying jobs, moved into the suburbs. But because we had a scholarship program, they were able to get scholarships and place their kids in much better performing private schools still in their community. There were still schools in their neighborhoods that allowed them to remain connected to their community, and also to help rescue other families through the scholarship program to attend better performing schools as well. And so the incentives that the school choice provided was really to stay in your community and give back. Without having to sacrifice their child's education. So I thought that was a really powerful story, and they were tremendously powerful advocates for choice, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They were one of the families we represented in the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was just, talk about the least of these, and that's what school choice does.
It's really important to remember, too, that there are all kinds of schools that are anchors for the community. Just as you said, there are charter schools, there are private schools, there are tutoring centers in strip malls that can anchor the community and are options for the people who live there. So the more of that we have, the more we have the ability for families like the one you're talking about to stay in their community, to invest in that community, and to be able to meet the diverse needs of the kids in the community, and that does lift all boats. It's not just one option, or else you're not sticking with your own community. There are many ways to do it, and many ways to do it in your own geographical location. And this kind of choice for parents really empowers those different plants to grow in their own soil.
Yeah, and the Nards are an interesting case study, because even though all the kids went to the same elementary school in a private school, when they moved on to high school, they all chose different paths. So one of their sons played football at Brophy, which is a great private Catholic school in Phoenix. One of them went to a local magnet school, and the other went to his zoned public high school, because he felt he was called to serve there and to minister there and to learn there. And so all of their kids, chose something different at the high school level, and that's only because they had the options available to them to do that.
Yeah, choice again. So we've talked a lot about school choice and educational choice. So what does that meant? What does it mean, educational choice and school choice?
Well, like touching again on the social justice theme, the Fordham Institute last year put out this fascinating school district map of the entire state of Ohio. Okay, and I'm afraid that the vast majority of the country looks like Ohio, because what they had done is to color in districts according to whether or not they participate in open enrollment. Okay, and what you saw in this map is every single large urban city in Ohio is completely surrounded by school districts who choose not to participate in open enrollment. My mother grew up in Lakewood, Ohio. Guess what? Outside Cleveland, they don't participate in open enrollment. If you look at Columbus, it looks like a donut. It's completely surrounded by districts who do not participate in open enrollment. Now, a little bit outside of Columbus, you see some districts a different color. And the different color means we participate in open enrollment, but only with adjacent districts. Now, you tell me, what kids do you think they're trying to avoid? Okay. Now, let me tell you about another state. That's the state that Tim and I live in. In Arizona, every single school district participates in open enrollment. All of them do. Okay. Right now, the Scottsdale Unified School District has 4,000 kids out of their total 25,000 kids that do not live in Scottsdale. Okay, Scottsdale is kind of our Beverly Hills sort of district, right? This is like most fancy school districts in this country say, "Oh, would you like to come to Plano?" Say, "I'm originally from Texas." Great. Well, you plunk down $500,000 and you'll be in our attendance zone and you can come. Oh, what? You don't have $500,000? Well, that's unfortunate. It's too bad to be you. Okay. Why do you think it is that Scottsdale Unified has 4,000 kids that don't live within the district boundaries. I want to tell you that it's not because they have an unusual suburban concern for economic and racial integration. I actually live in the Scottsdale School District, and as lovely people that are all around me and whatnot, I don't think that's it. The reason Scottsdale has brought in 4,000 kids from out of the district is because there are 9,000 kids that live in Scottsdale's district boundaries but actually go to school somewhere else. And that created the empty seats, okay, that allowed the opportunity for those 4,000 kids to come in. So if you support equality of opportunity, right, if you want kids to have an opportunity to get a good education, what we've seen happen in Arizona is that different choice programs interact with each other in very interesting ways, and there's sort of like a cascade of opportunities created in the process. There are twice as many kids doing open enrollment in the Phoenix area as there are charter school kids. We have the most charter school kids in the country. We're about 17% charter, but we're about 31% open enrollment, okay? And you throw in our private school students and our homeschool students, and a majority of students in the Phoenix area do not attend their zoned public school, okay? Now, not coincidentally, Arizona has also been leading the nation in academic improvement on the national tests since 2009. Okay, it's called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They give 6 different tests to students at the state level, usually every 2 years. There are 2 states that made statistically significant gains on all 6 tests, and Arizona is one of them. Okay, so if this whole choice business were somehow destructive to the interests of students attending district schools, you have a really hard time finding evidence of that in the actual achievement scores, because our scores are heading in the right direction.
Sounds good to me. Do you have anything to add?
Well, sure. I mean, school choice is just simply the concept that every parent would have the right to choose the school that's going to meet their students' needs, whether it's a public, private, charter school. That's school choice in my mind, that every parent would have the ability to choose the school that's going to best meet their child's needs. And in fact, we have programs like that in Arizona. We've talked about them. Mm-hmm. But we also have a program that sort of moves us beyond the concept of school choice to genuine educational choice. And that is our Empowerment Scholarship Account program that we've mentioned a couple of times. And it works different than a typical school choice program. Most school choice programs provide students with a scholarship to attend a private school. Sometimes those scholarships meet the full cost of tuition. Sometimes they're partial scholarships. But it does one thing, and it pays for private school tuition. The Arizona ESA program came about as a result of necessity. We had 2 voucher programs, publicly funded scholarship programs, one for students with special needs, one for students in foster care, that was actually struck down by our Arizona Supreme Court, declared unconstitutional under a provision of our Arizona Constitution that says there should be no public funds appropriated in aid of private or sectarian schools. That's the provision that it was struck down under. And our court said, because parents had no choice when they received the scholarship but to use it at either a private or sectarian school, this program must be in aid of those schools. And so Matt and I looked at that decision, and we actually went back and we listened to the oral argument that took place in the case. And there was a colloquy that occurred between one of the Arizona Supreme Court justices and the lawyer who was representing the Arizona Teachers Union, which was the entity challenging the voucher programs. And the justice said to the Teachers Union's lawyer, what if instead of a restricted voucher, we gave parents a sum of money and just said, use it for education? Would that program violate the Constitution? And the Teachers Union's lawyer said, well, no, because you wouldn't be constraining their choice. Presumably, they could use it to pay a tutor or buy curriculum, do something else. As long as they weren't forced to use it at a private school, I think it would pass muster under the Constitution. And so Matt and I looked at each other and said, this is a great idea for a school choice program. And so we created, we helped draft and push through the Arizona Empowerment Scholarship Account program, which basically takes the money that the state would have spent on an eligible student, places it into a flexible education spending account, and says, parents, you have a variety of options on how do you want to use this money. You don't have to enroll your student in a private school. You can if you want to, and you can use it on tuition if you want to, but you can also educate your student at home. You can take online courses. You can buy curriculum. You can, you can pay for the therapies, speech, occupational, other things.
Tuition.
And a really unique feature that I think we're both very proud of is we said you can save that money and use it for college education. In fact, Austin, who I mentioned earlier, he was able to save almost $20,000 for future college education because of the amount of money that he received because of his Asperger's diagnosis compared to the $6,000 tuition he was spending at his private school. So I mean, I think the difference is, there are programs that give families school choice, but there are also families that push us beyond that to truly personalized learning and educational choice.
Yeah, I still remember the day Clint Bullock and I were both working at the Goldwater Institute, and we came to talk to Tim about this idea. And Tim's, your eyes got this big, and you said, you need to go watch the oral arguments. And Clint and I kind of said something else, and you said, you need to go watch the oral arguments, right? And in fact, in the decision, I remember the last lines of the decision that struck the voucher programs down, and we were very upset about that, and we think it was wrongly decided. But the last one of the lines in the decision was, there very well may be a way to structure a program like this that does not violate the Arizona Constitution. This, however, is not it. ... right? We really think that the Empowerment Scholarship Account model is a substantial improvement over the typical model of school choice, because it is so flexible, and it was, thanks to Tim's defense, actually found constitutional, because the very same lawyer that said that program would be okay was actually arguing that it was unconstitutional a year later, but we prevailed in that. And so now there are multiple ESA programs, not only in Arizona, but they're operating in Tennessee and Mississippi and Florida and North Carolina now. And there's been dozens of these introduced around the country. And I understand there might be one introduced here in Oregon. So we're very excited about this as a future opportunity for a lot of American families.
We are excited. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but I'm thrilled about the education. We're calling it an education savings account, but I just think it's time, and this is what parents need. This is what needs to happen. These are the kids that need to be able to move forward as quickly as we can. We have a question in the audience.
Yeah, I think we have a question from Kim.
Excuse me. Tim, you touched on teachers' unions as it related to that case, and my question was just concerning the role of the teachers' unions and how they may be impacting the progress of policy regarding school choice.
Well, they're certainly one of the primary entities that challenge school choice programs when they are passed by state legislatures. We have been defending programs against legal attacks, as I said, since 1991. Those cases have always involved both challenges under state constitutional provisions and also the federal Constitution. In 2002, we set a landmark precedent, Zellman v. Simmons-Harris, which held that school choice programs that include religious schools are permissible so long as the government is neutral with regard to religion, neither favoring religion over non-religion or one religion over another, and as long as parents are exercising a genuine choice as to which school they enroll their students into. As long as those two touchstones of constitutionality are met, programs pass muster under the federal Constitution. It was only a couple of weeks after that decision that Robert Shannon, the then lead attorney for the National Education Association, was in New York debating the concept of school choice. And during that debate, he said, we will abandon the Establishment Clause, and we will turn our attention exclusively to state constitutions, and we will continue to challenge school choice programs from high and lofty principles like separation of church and state to Mickey Mouse constitutional provisions like single subject rules. And that was his declaration, and he's been true to his word. Like I said, to this day, we're fighting school choice battles right now in Montana, Florida, Maine. We just wrapped up a case successfully in Puerto Rico, and I fully expect to continue to see challenges filed as new programs are enacted in each individual state.
Well, I think it's really important to distinguish between the interests of the unions, and the unions do have particular interests, and they zealously guard them, and the interests of actual teachers. Okay. I think everyone in this audience has teachers in your family, your friends, your associations, and usually it's been my observation that when you get a group of educators together, the conversation often turns to the idea that, if they were in charge, things would be better, right? That their administrators do this, that the state legislators do that, right? That the federal government has these things and blah, 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 okay? So what if we turned this around and thought about this as, and I think that states that have done a lot of choice have actually taken a very large step in this direction of saying to educators, okay, show me, don't tell me, right? You want the opportunity to found a school that reflects your vision of a high quality education? Do you want to run the show? Do you want to be a part of an organization that you're in control of, rather than a part of a large bureaucratic, entity? If you want to do that, then the state of Florida has policies in place for you, right? The state of Arizona has policies in place to give you that opportunity. And you know what? I know educators who took out 3 mortgages on their homes and emptied their retirement savings to start a school. Okay. I know another charter school operator who opened a charter school in the toughest part of town, and her parents did that for her so she could buy a bowling alley, right, and convert it into a school to give opportunity to low-income Hispanic kids in South Phoenix. Okay. This isn't just about opportunities for families. It's also about opportunities for educators, right? They have so much to gain from this, right? And it is unfortunate that their unions are so vigorous in opposing the very things that would give educators more opportunity to be in control of the schools and to have parents and families invest their children in their vision of a high quality education.
That's right. So we've talked about educational choice and choice school programs, and we know that they're well. The parents are pleased with what they're seeing, and we kind of say you vote with your feet. Things are changing. The one thing I want to make sure that we all understand tonight is that when we talk about school choice, we include public school. We're not dropping the axe. Sometimes it seems like when I visit with people about school choice, they're like, oh, you don't like public school. No, I do. And it fits some kids at certain times, but we're looking for more choice for the kids like your daughter and the situations that we're talking about. So we've kind of talked about it, but do you want to elaborate a little bit on what are the benefits of choice to students and teachers?
I've shot my ammo on that one.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, it is true, though, that choice programs do give opportunities for teachers to go out and establish schools that are in line with their personal visions for education. I defended an education savings account program in Nevada, and one of the individuals I had the pleasure of running into was a teacher who opened up an academy. She called it the Joy Academy because she had felt like the joy had been taken from her through things like standardized testing, all the preparation that they were going through in the classroom, bureaucratic rules. She had lost her joy, and she felt like the students had lost their joy. And so the Joy Academy that came about as a result of the passage of the school choice program was simply designed to put the joy and the fun and the enjoyment back into learning. And it's a really great campus. If you're ever in Nevada, Matt,
sometimes
stop by the Joy Academy.
When we're talking about education, we're talking about a dynamic situation. We're talking about unrepeatable human beings, both the kids and the teachers and the parents and everyone who is involved. And I think when all of us look back on our educations and we remember years that really stood out to us, or what was it that set us down the path we went on, there was a specific human being involved. And I think that we really can't lose sight of that. So when we're talking about educational choice and how can we make schools better, we're talking about human beings interacting with other human beings. And there's no possible way we could predict what kind of dynamism comes out of the human creativity when you have specific human beings interacting with each other. And you've already given several examples of how that happens. People who start schools for particular reasons, for particular kids in particular neighborhoods. And that's not necessarily repeatable. It may be. There are ways you could copy things that work, but sometimes it's a group of people who came together at the right place at the right time. And that's something that I think is really, really exciting about this whole field right now.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Special shout out to Mrs. Cleland, 5th grade teacher, Spencer Williams Elementary School down in California.
I think we all have teachers. I had Mr. Gaunt. He was 6'3" and probably a pretty tough teacher, but he sticks out in my mind, and he just made education and learning fun. You know, we kind of groveled at his feet to see what we were going to do the next day. So it is important. We have a question in the audience.
We do. We have a question from Eric, right, on funding.
Okay, it's for you.
What obstacles do you see in returning school funding to local responsibility and control versus state and federal?
This one's for Matt.
About a century of accumulated history at this point. It has been the case that if you look at the evolution of the public school system, and again, it was never done with bad intent per se, but it did used to be more genuinely local. Right. I mean, if you think about it, and we all have this to this day, there is this romantic attachment to the idea of the one-room schoolhouse. It's always red, right? You've seen it, right? But what has happened over the years is whereas ideally, schools are local democracies. There are elections, and you can think about this in terms of like a New Hampshire small town election where people get together and right. But what's happened steadily is that policy making has moved to the state level and now even to the federal level, right? And there's been a lot of attempts to sort of regulate our way to quality that has actually reduced the autonomy of school leaders and of educators, right? And I think that the problem is that we are overly attached to this idea of bureaucratic accountability, right? Because look in the George W. Bush years, right? There was sort of this proposition put forth that said, look, if we're going to give money, then we deserve transparency. We deserve to know whether the kids are learning things or not. And there are very, very large problems with kids, like not learning basic literacy skills. It's criminally common, right? But in the process, right, what we've lost is this sense of local community with schools. I think that it is possible that we could see more of a movement back towards giving more autonomy, including to the district schools, right, within a choice-based system. So, for instance, in Arizona, now that we know about a third of the kids are moving around within the district system itself, right, there is a strong argument to be made that, look, parents are holding districts accountable too. And by accountable, I mean sort of like Kathy Visser accountable, real accountability, not compliance accountability. So in that context, why don't we give them more freedom, right? For instance, charter schools in Arizona have been able to hire, whether they wanted, they've had the freedom to hire non-certified teachers from the beginning, when the first charter schools in 1995. Okay, if you are a retiring engineer and would like to teach math, or and meanwhile, Bill Gates could not teach a computer science class at a district school in Arizona because he's not certified. Right now, our charter schools have remarkable average levels of achievement, the very high levels of average achievement, and with a majority minority student population. Apparently, this whole freedom to hire teachers that don't necessarily have traditional certification is working out just fine for them. So, the state legislature in Arizona decided, why don't we give the same freedom to district schools, right? The charter schools are fishing in a larger pond for teachers, right? I think that in a choice context, right, and educators are deeply frustrated with the bureaucratic accountability air quote system, right? I think that a long conversation we need to have in this country is about providing more autonomy, including to the districts, right? Mm-hmm. As long as parents have the option of leaving a school that they feel that is not operating in the best interest of their particular child, right? Because in the end, it doesn't matter if your average achievement is high. If it's not working for your individual student, then they need the options to go somewhere else. And because that's a far more powerful form of accountability than anything bureaucratic will ever be done, I actually think there is some potential for a bit of a grand bargain on this front, where educators get more freedom, but in the context where families are empowered to hold them accountable.
Okay. Well, I hear we have a question online.
We do. We have a question online from Phyllis who asks, if kids move away from public schooling, how will those public schools survive with that much less funding? Wouldn't it take a poorly performing school to an even less viable position?
Look, education funding is for one purpose only. It's to educate the child. It's not to perpetuate any one particular system. It's not to perpetuate any one particular school. That said, we have almost 3 decades of research into this school choice experiment, and what we've seen in every state that has enacted robust school choice is that it has had no adverse effect on the public school system, on the kids who are in the public school system. If anything, what we've seen is that these choice programs are raising test scores, increasing opportunities for families, and like Matt said, in the Scottsdale School District, as students have moved out, other kids trapped in other poorly performing schools have had an opportunity to move in. And the reality is, even if we just had a public school system, individual schools will always have periods of booming enrollment, declining enrollment, and districts will have to adjust to that. One of our friends, Dr. Ben Scafferty in Georgia, talks a lot about fixed and variable costs in the public school system, and he says that if you follow the administrator from one legislative hearing to another, when he comes into one room, he'll oppose a school choice program, saying, if that student leaves, we still got to keep the lights on. We still got to pay the janitor. We still got to pay, if we run the buses. If we lose that student, we're in trouble. And when he's in that situation, it sounds like all costs are fixed. But then he goes next door to advocate for higher budgets, and he says, we've got more students coming into our schools. We need more money. And it sounds like all costs are variable. Well, which is it? If all costs are fixed, then you don't need any more money when new students come into your school. If all costs and so the reality is every school system, it should be vibrant, it should be viable, it should be in flux, and the idea is that we need to be student-centered, not school-centered, and ensure that every student has the opportunity to find a school that's going to best meet his or her needs.
Great. So we've got a couple of funding questions, so let's just get after it. What does the data indicate in relation to spending more money on the public school system?
We had a long period after World War II of very steady increases in per pupil funding, including after adjusting for inflation. So there was a very large increase in funding per pupil, inflation adjusted, and there was not a corresponding large increase in performance. Right. And another way to think about this was a very large decline in the productivity over the education spending in our system. Okay. it's an unfortunate reality. You can go and look up the statistics for yourself in the Digest of Education Statistics, for instance, and it's just crystal clear. And you can also look and see what was done with that money. Okay, the vast majority of costs in a school system is employee costs, right? So way back when, in the 1950s, let's say, there were 2 teachers in the American public school system for every single non-teacher. Okay, now don't get me wrong, because you can't run a school system without non-teachers. You need some people who are non-teachers. Okay, but the school system back then, 2 teachers for every non-teacher. Today, it is a non-teacher for every single teacher. Okay, we've prioritized non-teaching staff in the public school system to a vast degree. Okay, and what that has done is to actually put a cap on the amount of compensation we can give to teachers, right? If every teacher is supporting more and more non-teachers, right, it makes it very difficult to provide teachers, especially really effective teachers, the ones that were really desperate to keep in the classroom, right? It makes it very difficult to pay them at a high level, right? This situation does not interfere with the economic interests of the unions, right? The unions, actually, we call them teacher unions, but we need to recognize this, that at this point, teacher unions are not actually teacher unions. They're school district employee unions, right? And they don't like, for instance, there's a controversy going on in Arizona. The state of Arizona has pledged to increase teacher pay by 20%. And there are a lot of people angry about that because it doesn't include the non-teachers, right? The president of the Tucson Unified School Board, the Tucson School District, was contemplating doing something with their money other than increasing teacher pay, right? And he literally said something to the paper on the lines of, guys, we have a teacher shortage. We don't have a lunch lady shortage.
Okay, Tim, do you have anything you want to add? Nope. All right, let's move on. Is there any research on how educational choice programs impact racial segregation, integration in the overall education system?
Yeah, there's a great deal of it. And it gets back to the problems with zip code assignment, right? The current system is, and people often make the mistake of assuming that things are okay in the district system and they must be bad or weird or strange or worse in a choice system. And that is not the case, right? So I want you to just think in your mind's eye right now, what does racial segregation in the Detroit metro area look like in terms of schooling, right? Is it highly integrated? No, right? It is highly segregated, with African Americans and Hispanic students concentrated in the city of Detroit and Anglos concentrated in the suburbs around Detroit. And that's not unique to Detroit. That's how most of the country looks. Okay? Anything we can do to break down the link between zip code and schooling creates the opportunity for greater levels of racial and economic integration. Now, that doesn't mean that every single case will work out that way, but the research, and we've got decades of research on this, shows that in the aggregate that these choice programs actually promote integration and decrease segregation.
Okay. Anything?
I mean, Matt nailed that one.
All right. Way to go, Matt. All right. We have 2 questions left, and I saved these for last on purpose. My first question is to you, so you're on the hot seat. Tim, can you tell us about Oregon's Universal Education Savings Account that you wrote as a model for Oregon?
Well, sure. So the model for Oregon is really based on the model in Arizona, except instead of just a targeted program for students with disabilities, and over time in Arizona we have increased it to additional student populations. The draft for Oregon is a universal program. Every single student in Oregon would be eligible to participate in the program, period. That's the way it was designed. It would allow parents to take their student out of the public school system, obtain an ESA, and individually personalized design their students' education. A couple of things that I like about the program. Number one, it allows families to purchase or pay for individual courses at public and charter schools. So we haven't left them out of the system. If a particular math teacher at a particular high school is well known for being the best teacher, the school can open that classroom up, add additional classes, opportunities for the teacher to teach additional courses if he or she can handle that load. We allow families to, and we allow families to do the same thing with college savings, which encourages wise stewardship of those funds over the lifetime of the student. That's the 10,000-foot view of the Oregon ESA program.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've been able to share a little bit of this news as I've traveled around, and it just seems like the best of the best. You know, it's not a have to, it's a choice. And that's what we want, is another choice for families to be able to choose. And it's going to cause a little competition. And that's good. We need to be able to move our kids around and get the things that they need in the way that fits their needs. So we have one last question, and I'm going to ask all three of you. If enacted, how would the proposed education savings account bill empower Oregon parents?
Well, right now, many parents don't have, they have to take what they're given. The zip code assignment is alive and well, alive and unwell up here in Oregon, and it'll really allow families to not simply have to take what is given to them, but to go out and to find that school or that educational environment that is going to work for them to truly personalize, individualize their students' education. I just think it's such a cool thing to think that a student could wake up in the morning, get online, take a Spanish class with students from around the world with an instructor who's in another country perhaps, and then get off that, do some coursework on their own, then maybe get in the car, go down to the community college, take a science course, come back home, that afternoon go play sports for their local public or charter school. There's just such an opportunity to really break down a child's education and personalize it, individualize it.
So probably most people working in this audience, some of you may be retired, but probably most people in the audience here are employees of someone, right? And I want you to just think, as a quick little thought experiment, how have your bosses over the years treated you if they liked the work you do and they knew that you had other people that wanted to hire you? Okay. Do they treat you better than if that were not the case, or worse? Okay. The most important empowerment that would happen on the aggregate, on the whole, right, would be for the students that don't actually use the program, okay? Just the fact that every student would have the opportunity to use the program, right? That every single family in Oregon, if their schooling situation were not working for them, they have the opportunity to seek a different environment, a different school, a different form of education. That fundamentally changes the power arrangements, right? You go from being a captive, right, to being someone that has options, right? And that will create the incentive and sort of a healthy competition for all service providers, right, to do a better job, right? So getting back to Kathy Visser in Arizona, right? I once explained to her where the Arizona ESA program came from. I explained, okay, there was this voucher program in Florida, blah, blah, we did something different. And she said, that's really interesting. So with the voucher program like Florida, I could hold the public school accountable. But with the ESA program, I can hold public and private schools accountable. Okay. And that ability, what you would see is that the vast majority of Oregon students there would be no mad rush to private schools. I can tell you this right now. We've got decades of experience of this right now. There would be no, although this is what the unions fear, right? There's going to be this mad rush out to the exits and everyone's going to leave, and that's not what happens. Okay, what happens is that incrementally it grows over time. People do participate, right? But the most important thing is the fact that everyone has the opportunity to participate means that the education of everyone actually improves because you fundamentally change the incentives in the system for the better, and most of all to the advantage of the disadvantaged now, who are the ones that have the least power, the ones that cannot afford a suburban school, the ones that cannot afford private school tuition. These are kids who are trapped in their current situation. You just give the possibility for them to seek a different situation, and you'll start to see the needle move in the right direction.
Yeah, I think Matt's last point there is really, really important because that's how we see change across the entire school system. Every method of education, when the schools and the parents know that there is that relationship there, that's when we will really see change in education. We see all the time with the parents who call looking for scholarships through the Children's Scholarship Fund Oregon, they're already looking for options, otherwise they wouldn't be calling me. And they are looking for what they could have access to, what they're able to afford, what is there in our state. An education savings account would be truly empowering for low and middle income families, and it would also hold all of the schools accountable to everyone, no matter their income, because they would have real options.
They sacrifice, parents do, every day to make education meet their child's needs. They'll run miles, they'll go without food, they'll do whatever it takes. And I know what it was like as we came into a new school year, and I'd say to my husband, babe, I need a little bit of money. And he'd say, great, how much now? But we made it work. And now the option, if we can get our ESA, will be that they can have what they need. And we're so grateful for that. And we're grateful to Senator Linthicum for having the vision and Tim writing it and everybody here tonight. So I'm sure you've all been well fed. I have learned a lot of things that I didn't know. Choice changes lives. And that is exactly what we want to do for the Oregon students and their families. Before we say goodnight, if you find that you want to be engaged and involved, go to our website, School Choice for Oregon, and you'll see our bills and our efforts and our events that'll be promoting school choice. And remember to sign our pledge. So would you join me in thanking our guest speakers tonight? It's been great. And thank you to all of you who took the time, that are listening and spent time with us this evening to help kids have a better future. Thanks and good night. You guys did awesome.
Office, probably stay.